It was a very bright Friday morning. I woke up as usual to go to work. And from that day, I've never seen light of day again.
It was big and massive. Three major buildings were really hit. The only one that survived was the Cooperative Bank. The other two, the Teacher Service Commission building and the American Embassy, are not there anymore. And the American Embassy building was built enormously strong. And it actually kind of moved and settled back. And that's why it was condemned.
I looked back one glance and I saw a very big luminous white cloud floating upwards. And then I just had a loud bang and I felt myself lifted up, floating. Then I went, I think I was dropped somewhere, I don't know where it was.
All the stories collapsed on top of each other. It was just like chapatis, one on top of the other. And there was no distance left between them. And that's why basically the casualty rate was so high.
What I saw that day, I wouldn't like to remember because it was terrible. People were crying, people were falling from the building, there was fire. I was crying, I was like a mad woman.
I became unconscious, and how I was rescued to the hospital is only God who knows.
Immediately after the explosion, of course there was a lot of confusion, but members of the public rushed pretty quickly to see if they can help. I don't think that the American personnel was trained in how to behave and control themselves in a time like that. I don't think that terrorism was a word that most Americans knew very well in 1998, and definitely not in East Africa. The Marines took off, the Marines that guard the building, and they swung into action, and the first action they took was to protect the building. They didn't know whether another attack is coming or not. So their attempts to protect the building and the attempts of other people to remove injured and actually help the people in the building clashed. And it looked again as if the Americans are insensitive and not helpful and doing the opposite, but it was not exactly the case. The Marines have a mandate to protect the embassy until they are given any other instructions. Al-Qaeda was a name that was not known prior to these two embassy bombings, not to forget the one in Tanzania and Dar es Salaam. But it was the first real public action of Al-Qaeda, and it also marked their modus operandi, usually multiple attacks at the same time.
When I heard that those people were also Muslims, I felt so bad, because in our Quran, we don't teach to kill people, we teach to protect life. So terrorism is all about a bad person with a bad heart.
To me, these are people who are, suffering more than I am suffering. They're prisoners. They do it and they run and hide. I feel I'm above them in a certain way. So there's no need of feeling bitter towards them.
But the social impact also was the fact that the Muslims felt more and more alienated, and there was a kind of process that appeared to victimize the Muslim community in its totality rather than the criminal elements within it.
Allahu Akbar.
There was a denial, it's not part of us. But in time, as the investigation went forward and they realized that some members of the Kenyan community were involved, and some members from overseas, and some members from Somalia and Yemen, etc., etc. And suddenly the realization that Kenya borders were totally porous, that Kenya really had no anti-terrorism response. It affected everything. In today's world, it's hard to believe that in 1998 people didn't know how to spell terrorism or international terrorism. Nobody knew who Al-Qaeda was. American embassies overseas were not drilled and trained. Actually, no embassy overseas was, except again with the Israelis maybe, was never expecting anything of that sort. And therefore there were no SOPs, there were no regulations of what to do. And the confusion was high.
In terms of even compensation, the American government said it was the Kenyan government responsibility to compensate its own people. And for that reason, it has been quite a financial challenge to many survivors, because they can't make a living from their meager resources. Most of them depend on their families to support them, because most of them lost their jobs, or some can't be able to even perform. And that indeed has been quite traumatizing to the survivors. And as a result, many have died because of trauma and difficulties of life. In fact, I've been connected to many victims of terrorism around the world, including Oklahoma bombing victims, September 11, and even the London bombing victims. And this connection is very, very important to us survivors, because it helps in our healing journey. if you associate with someone who has been affected like yourself, you learn how he's been able to cope in his new situation. So they have been quite a pillar in my healing, and indeed they're my great friends. We encourage each other, we support each other, and together we move on knowing that we can be able to make a difference in our own lives by supporting each other through this journey. For the last 10 years, I have been doing my utmost best to make a difference in my life, the lives of those around me, and the lives of those people around the world who are in a way traumatized or who are going through difficult challenges. So my achievement is as a result of that strong will. When I undertook my rehab training in the U.S., I never knew that I would be able to even cycle blind. And when I got the invitation to do a cycling tour from New York World Trade Center to the Pentagon in DC, I didn't know that I could cycle for 500 kilometers in 3 days. But I was able to do this. And from that time, I've been able to participate in many extreme sporting activities, including in 2005, summiting to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro and becoming the first blind African to achieve that feat. Last year, in 2007, from January to May, I got involved in a life-changing experience, cycling blind from Cairo to Cape Town.
After the 4th anniversary, that's when I just gave up and then prayed to God at least to make me reconstruct myself with my family.
Actually, it's God who has made it possible for all of us to move on and be where we are right now. I know it's demoralizing and it changes lives, but I think there's hope in the end of the tunnel.
I think we're just victims of circumstances. These are things that happen anywhere in the world. It could be in Kenya, it could be in America, it could be in Britain. It can happen anywhere. And when such a thing happens, to me, the most important thing is just to accept your situation and look to ways on how you can be able to move on with your life, and also spread a message of peace and unity and reconciliation, because that's what we are all about, human beings. So if we can be able to be a one united nation, I feel that we can be able to grow and help each other despite the difficulty that we all face.